the Cisco Grove UFO incident. On September 4th, 1964, one of the most odd UFO encounters in history took place. 28-year-old Donald Shrum was a welder for Aerojet Corporation, a company that made nuclear missiles. He and some of his friends went bow hunting in Cisco Grove, California. Firearms weren't allowed, but Donald was okay with this and excited for the trip. Since this was before cell phones, Don and the others were supposed to stay close to each other during the hunt to avoid being lost. But due to the excitement of the hunt, Donald became separated from his friends. As night fell, he decided to get some sleep and find his way back to camp the next morning. To avoid being attacked by any predators, he climbed a tree and harnessed himself to a branch with a military strength belt. In the middle of the night, he saw something strange. A bright light was floating through the forest, about 8 to 10 inches across. At first, Don figured his friends had reported him missing and this was a helicopter, so he climbed down from the tree and began lighting flares to try and catch the attention of whoever this was. Strangely, the object made no sound and flew low, alarming Don, who climbed back into the tree and stayed quiet. But this wasn't some ordinary light. As it came closer, Donald saw something unbelievable. A giant black cylinder-shaped ship that was 150 feet long. It was the size of a 14-story building lying on its side. On the side of the craft, Donald watched 3 bright slits appear, and a smaller ship came floating out of the mothership. It approached him and lit up the tree where he was hiding. Absolutely terrified, Donald clutched his bow so hard that his knuckles turned white. Minutes passed and Donald heard strange sounds from the nearby brush. Stomping and scraping, they grew closer to him with each passing second, and what he saw next would shock him for the rest of his days. 2 beings that looked humanoid that were 4 or 5 feet tall. They were dressed in silver hooded suits with what looked like welding goggles on. They were collecting leaves and dirt samples and placing them into tubes. They looked into the direction of Don's tree and locked eyes with him. Seconds later, another being approached Donald, but this one was different from the others. In fact, it was a robot with orange eyes and a rectangle-like slit for a mouth. When it opened its mouth, its entire jaw lowered. It looked every bit like a robot from classic sci-fi TV shows. The robot looked up at Donald and with a hiss opened its mouth. As it did, a strange white smoke oozed out and Don couldn't move. His vision was blurry and everything went black. When Donald came to, he was sick and felt like he needed to vomit. Meanwhile, the robotic being was shaking the tree to bring him down. Ready to defend himself, Donald grabbed his bow and drew it back. He shot the robot square in the chest and he saw a bright spark. The humanoids retreated to a safe distance, but the robot steadied himself and prepared to attack once more. It opened its mouth and let out more of the same white vapor from before. Donald tried to cover his mouth, but it was like the oxygen itself was pulled from his lungs, and he ultimately passed out again. Coming to, the beings were still trying to climb the tree to get to him. Donald, thinking on his feet, drew his bow back once more and hit the robot again and again, but it had no effect and he quickly ran out of arrows. Getting desperate, he felt around and found a box of matches in his pocket. He grabbed the hat off his head, lit it on fire, and threw it at the aliens. It seemed to frighten them somewhat, but the robot persisted. So Donald started to rip pieces from his shirt and light them on fire before throwing them. In retaliation, the robot opened his mouth once more and knocked him out with that odd smoke. When he awoke, the creatures kept coming, so he kept fighting, reporting that this went on for the most of the night. At one point, he awoke to find 2 robots standing together, and the metallic monsters opened their mouths and flooded the air with that white smoke. Donald was sure this was the end for him. All he could think about was his wife and daughter he'd be leaving behind. When he awoke this time, he was still alive, and he noticed the sun coming up and the creatures were gone. So he lowered himself from the tree and rushed back to his camp. Here he told his story, and his friends believed him, as they saw the ship with their own eyes, though Shrum was the only one who saw the beings. Over time, Donald told many people his tale and was even interviewed by the FBI, who ultimately labeled him crazy and the case a hoax. Over the years, his story never changed, and he was certain this experience happened. Now, this story is very silly and had no witnesses, but like I always say, keeping an open mind is important. Sure, this man could have been lying or even on something, but at the same time, strange things happen in our world. There are countless stories throughout time that will make you wonder. And that wonder to me is what keeps interest alive in these beings. Hopefully, with enough pushing, we can learn the truth of if we're really alone out there. And that, my follower, I find to be very unlikely. Follow for more.